Today, I'm finally making a video I've wanted to make for a really long time. We are talking about in-ear monitors, and I have been on the fence on getting custom molded in-ear monitors for over 10 years. Since I was a kid, I've always felt like having custom molded in-ears sort of like being a part of an exclusive special club. And today, I am now a part of that club. And the reason I was hesitant for so long is because you can't try them before you buy them, and they're very expensive. So the question that I've wanted answered for myself for all this time, and that I want to try to answer for you if possible, is basically, are they worth it? We know that custom molded in-ears are expensive. We know that they're highly rated, but we also know that you can't really try them until you actually put down the money. So I want to do the best that I can to take you vicariously through my process of getting custom molds, ordering them, and then finally using them. I'm going to try and answer the question, are they worth it for you? And I want this to be a kind of different video than ones you've probably already seen on custom molded in-ears. Seems like the recommendations that I was getting from anyone I ever talked to about in-ears or any of the videos I watched always just said, custom molded in-ears will change your life. They're amazing. Don't even think about it. Buy the most expensive ones you can and don't think twice. I'm here today to give you a slightly different perspective, and I am going to recommend custom molded in-ears for some folks, but I'm actually not going to recommend them for others. So stay tuned. Feel free to jump around. I'm going to try and have all of these sections well organized, but I have a lot to say, and there are a lot of different questions that I hope to answer. So I'm going to have everything marked out. Feel free to jump around, but bear in mind that for your particular use case, I may make a recommendation that isn't to get these. So as you can see, I ended up going with 64 Audio, which at this point is a big player in the space and is a highly reputable brand. I was able for the first time to go to NAMM this past summer, and while I was there, I saw that there were many in-ear monitor booths open and available for people to demo products. So Ultimate Ears was one and 64 Audio was the other, and I thought, great, this is a perfect opportunity to actually try some of these earphones that I've really wanted to for a long time, but never really had the opportunity for obvious reasons. So what they had going on, both booths had universal fits of their models, which is something to keep in mind. I'm going to talk more about universal fits in this video, but they had the non-custom universal versions that you could try out yourself. So they would just swap out the ear tips. So I went first to the 64 Audio booth and tried the A6s. That's the 6-driver models, the A6Us, because they were the universals, and immediately thought, wow, these sound incredible. This sounds better than anything I'd used before. In the past, I've used some Amazon $50 cheapies. I've used the Shure SE215s, then I've also had the more expensive Shure SE425s and the 535s. So I've had some fairly expensive IEMs, and the moment I put those in, I thought, okay, this is definitely on another level. So I kept cycling around. I checked out some other companies, and Ultimate Ears in particular, I really wanted to compare against 64. I tried a few of their models, thought, these sound okay, but didn't really have the same impact on me that the 64s did. I'm not gonna go into huge detail about frequency curves and try and subjectively tell you that they sounded so clear, and in the mid-range this was happening, and the low end this was happening. That's kind of a subjective experience, and everyone is looking for a slightly different sound profile. So all I can tell you is that they were really enjoyable to listen to, and they were really clear in a way that I had not gotten out of other in-ear monitors. Now, at the same time, I had actually been looking for a company that I could go through this process with, and they could give me some insight into the back end of how in-ears are made, information that I could pass along to you all. And then I could just go through this process, get some in-ears, and then again, deliver that information. So I reached out to 64 after the show and I said, hey, here's the deal. I've got this small YouTube channel that not very many people watch, and I'd love to try some of your in-ears. Is there any sort of arrangement that we could work out? So long story short, I ended up coordinating with Ricky at 64 Audio. He ended up coordinating with me. He was really cool, spent a lot of time on the phone with me, explaining different in-ear models and just answering a lot of my questions that I had before going into the process. Now, funny enough, there was supposed to be some sort of contract or agreement that was sent between us, but I have the in-ears and I have not signed any sort of contract. So 64 has not approved this video. I can say whatever I want about the experience, and in fact I will. Not everything was perfect, but I will say up front that I'm going to recommend 64 as a company solely because of that initial experience I had where I tried all the different in-ears and I thought these sound amazing. Regardless of any sort of deal that I might have with them or any sort of arrangement or me hoping that I'm gonna get some sort of future work with them, that I don't really care about as much as just saying I am going to recommend them because the very first impression impression I had of them was trying the in-ears and thinking these sound really, really good. Pretty much all the information that I give here will be applicable to any in-ear company you're interested in. So I'm gonna talk about 64 audio, but you can apply it to Ultimate Ears or whatever else you're looking at. Okay, so let's go through the buying experience and we'll start with impressions. So if you are going to get custom molded in-ears, which again, I'll just mention that there are some folks that I'm actually going to recommend get a universal fit rather than custom molds, which I know most people who have custom molds don't say, but I am actually going to recommend that for some folks. But in any case, getting the impressions was not a part of the process that was super interesting to me, but I know other people are interested in. There are lots of videos on this, but in short, I actually went down to 64 Audio. Turns out we're in the same state. They are headquartered in Vancouver, Washington, a couple hours south of me. And as it happened, back when I started this whole process months ago, back in June or July, I was actually on my way down to California driving for a gig. So what ended up happening is the band and I stopped by the offices. I got to meet with Ricky in person, and then he personally did my impressions where they squirt the goo into your ears, you bite onto a bite block. It looks very awkward, especially when you have your bandmates around you making fun of you while you can't hear anything because your ears are plugged up. But in any case, that was my experience. Now, there are other companies that will do, I think, a laser impressions, so you don't have to get any goo squirted in your ears. And it's actually typically not the company themselves that'll do the impressions. You can get the impressions done if you're in Vancouver, Washington, but typically you would get them done by an audiologist, and they'll either put lasers in your ears or they'll put goo in your ears. That's pretty much the process. The whole thing took about 15 minutes. I thought Ricky did a great job, and I don't think that anyone should have any trepidation about actually getting the impressions done. So once I had the impressions, then I could actually start shopping for what model I wanted. Now it was the A6Us, or if they're the custom version, the A6Ts, the 6-driver models that I had initially thought were really, really impressive. And in talking to Ricky, he was able to kind of hype me up into getting the A12Ts, which are the step up from that. Those are the 12-driver models. And my thought process was kind of like, okay, well, maybe I'll use these live and practice with them, but also be able to mix with them if I get the A12s instead of the A6s. Now, I think if I was to do it over again, I would actually go with the 6s, and I'll explain why later. But the way I rationalized it was with my discount, I was able to get the 12s for a little bit less than I would have gotten the 6s for at full price anyways, so whatever, we'll just call it a wash. But in any case, I have the A12Ts. Now, shopping for and customizing the earphones on the website is a fun part of the process. You get to choose if you want custom designs or custom colors. You get to choose whether you want the actual mold itself to be clear or some sort of semi-translucent thing. So I ended up going with a clear mold with a purple on one side and a blue on the other side. I just liked that color combo and thought it would look a little bit different than everyone else's. Once you get them ordered, the next part of the process is to wait. And in my case, I think I was waiting maybe 4 or 5 weeks, which is something to consider if you're getting custom molds, that there's often going to be a waiting period, and it may not be insignificant. Now, for me, I really didn't care. I don't mind waiting for that sort of thing, so I didn't mind at all, but that is maybe a +1 for getting universal fits if that's something you don't like doing, waiting. If you need something really quick, you might want to get something that is in stock at the time. Now, here's where the timeline gets a little bit interesting, because after those 4 or 5 weeks, I got them in, and I actually made a video of my first impressions that I never posted. And the reason I never posted it was because there were a couple of issues with the video, and then a couple of issues actually with the in-ears that resulted in them going back to 64 a couple of times, which is why this video is finally being made in October, because I just recently got the final versions of my in-ears. So the first problem with the video was that I was not putting them in correctly. So I had all these cameras set up like this. I was like, hey, let's try these in-ears out for the first time together. But you can see I'm putting them in, and I'm not putting them in all the way. And because of that, I'm having a very bad sound experience. It does not sound good at all. They look ridiculous sticking out of my ears, and I'm talking while I'm experiencing them and really not being that impressed. So that was my kind of bad first experience. That was totally on me because I wasn't putting them in all the way. So I had to text a buddy who has some 64s, and I was like, hey, am I missing something here? What's going on? And he's like, oh yeah, when you first put them in and you think they're all the way in, keep pushing and keep twisting. They usually have to go in further. And he was absolutely right. I did exactly that. I was like, I don't think they can go in any farther. And I started pushing, started twisting, and then I felt that they were actually in all the way. So the first thing that I noticed that I thought was really interesting is that they sounded great. They sounded really, really good, but they sounded very similar to what I remember the universals sounding like. I kind of thought when I tried the universals, okay, these sound amazing, and when I get the custom molds, they're gonna sound even better because there's all this extra technology built in. I'm getting a better seal and the speakers are pointed directly at my eardrum. But I actually had a very similar experience, I thought, which is positive. They sounded really, really good, but they didn't sound that much better than the universals by my recollection. Now, although they sounded great, an issue I was having was that they stuck out really far from my ears, which is something I was not expecting at all. And honestly, I was kind of bummed out at. So I'll show you some photos to see what they looked like, but I had never seen in-ears stick that far out of someone's ears. And I can guarantee you that they were pushed in all the way at that point. So I ended up going back and forth a little bit with Ricky and said, hey, I feel terrible asking this, but are these supposed to stick out this far? Because this really does not look good to me. And part of what's cool about in-ears to me is that they are relatively flush with your ears. They're relatively low profile. And he was basically saying, yeah, I mean, they can stick out sometimes based on the shape of your ear, and you did get the 12 driver version, so there's a ton of drivers to fit in there. Now, you can let me know what you think based on the photos, but I was just really bummed at how far they were sticking out, and I was like, hey man, I hate to ask this, but is there any way we can shave these down or get these smaller or cross over to some A6Ts or something, because these are just sticking way too far out of my ears. And to 64's credit and to Ricky's credit, they were accommodating. They humored me and they said, yeah, we typically don't do refits for something cosmetic, but in your case, send them back to us and we'll see what we can do. So I happily sent them back. Took maybe another 2 or 3 weeks to get them back. They got remolded, which is great, and you can see how they fit in my ear now. They do still stick out a little bit, but it's definitely more in line with what I would expect out of an earphone that has that many drivers in it. But there's another thing you might want to bear in mind if you are ordering, and that's something that's important to you, is if you get more drivers, you may have physically bigger earphones, which is something I hadn't even considered. Now, the next issue I had was once I got them back, I put them in, I looked in the mirror, I thought, okay, great, these look a lot better, but I was getting some obvious distortion in the left ear. So something was clearly wrong with one of the drivers when they had done the remold. So I emailed, said, hey, I'm getting some distortion in the left ear. They said, huh, that's weird because it passed all of our tests when we sent them back out. I said, be that as it may, I can tell you for sure that the left ear has some very specific distortion in the high mid frequencies. They said, okay, send them back and we'll do a repair on them. It might take 2 to 3 weeks. I thought, okay, well, wait a second, you guys just sent this to me. They were sent with an obvious sound issue and it might be another 2 or 3 weeks. Like, I'm trying to make some videos here to help you guys out. And they said, hey, that's kind of how the process goes. So I ended up shipping them back at my expense. It didn't cost anything for the repair, but I did have to pay to ship them back, which I don't think is quite right. But they were accommodating with the refit, so I'll kind of call it a wash. Finally got it back probably after a week or a week and a half, and now they sound great and they look great, which is why I am finally making this video. Okay, so that finally brings us up to the present, and I can start talking about these in earnest and the whole process, and again, giving you a recommendation on whether something like this makes sense for your particular situation. So let's talk about sound first. And oddly enough, even though it seems like sound should be the most important part of the entire experience, I actually don't have a lot to say about sound, and here's why. I already described my first experience trying the A6Us, the universal ones, and it was really, really positive. Now, everyone's probably going to respond to different models a little bit differently because some people want to hear more high end, some people want to hear more low end. So I'm not going to get too bogged down in trying to use all of these terms to describe exactly what it sounded like, other than to tell you it's a very similar experience to having something like regular computer speakers and then listening to some very nice studio monitors, or being in a really old car with a crappy speaker and then getting into like a modern luxury sedan and hearing the sound system in there. There's just an obvious distinction between low-end systems and hi-fi systems, and that was exactly the experience that I was getting. So I don't really have much to say other than they sound really, really good. However, I do want to talk a little bit about diminishing returns. Now, diminishing returns is the point at which you keep spending more and more money, but you're not getting as much of an improvement. And I do, at least from 64's perspective, I do have a recommendation on how much I think you should spend and how high you should go on the driver ladder before you start getting diminishing returns. Now, as I mentioned, I have the A12Ts, but I think if I was to do it again, I would get the A6Ts, the 6-driver ones that I tried initially. I tried a couple of the lower end models and I thought, yes, I can tell that these are less expensive. And then I tried the 6s and then I tried the 12s and I thought, yes, I can tell that there's a difference, but honestly, it's not as much of a difference for the extra money that you're putting in. So I would say for most people in most scenarios, you should spend that extra money if you can to get up to the 6s or in, the 6-driver equivalent model in whatever company you're looking at. But going higher than that, going to 12s or 18s, I think you're going to get some benefits, but I think they're going to be diminishing. Now, something interesting about the 64 ears, and if you get the custom molds in particular, is that they have these little modules in them that actually let sound escape, and they let a certain amount of sound escape. So they can offer 20 dB, 15 dB, or 10 dB of sound reduction, and this has 2 effects, which is kind of interesting. First of all, it will actually affect the sound profile. So if you're using what they're calling the M20 module, where it's reducing 20 dB, you're going to get more bass. And if you go down to the M10s, where you're only reducing 10 dB, you're going to get a little bit less bass. So this is actually useful for a couple reasons. One, because you can kind of dial in if you feel like you're getting more bass than you want, if you're getting less bass than you want, you can use these modules to kind of dial in a sound profile even after you've already chosen what models you want. And then also, depending on your situation, you can block out more or less sound. So I found that for drummers, or at least for me, using the M10s is sort of like using a pair of nice musician earplugs, where I can actually hear a pretty good representation of my kit just in the room, which again, for me, is kind of nice to hear some stage volume and to hear just my own kit naturally, but it's also providing enough isolation that, of course, I can hear whatever it is that's going through the ears. Now, by doing that, I'm losing a little bit of low end, so there is a bit of a juggle there, but it's cool that you have those options, and that's something that may or may not be available with other companies. So for me, there are 2 key takeaways here, and one, which is sort of counter to what most people will tell you, my experience is that the custom molds do not sound significantly better than the universal fits. That said, at least the 64 universal fits that I tried and the custom molds all sound really good. I can highly recommend them. The other key takeaway is that for me, I think you start experiencing those diminishing returns right around 6 drivers, or in 64 audio terms, the A6Ts. So if you've got the money for it, I would try and at least get up to that level. All right, so let's talk about comfort and fit. And again, I have a couple of comments to make that I haven't heard anyone else mention in other videos, so they may be helpful to you. The first thing I will say is, if you ever have fit issues with universal headphones, if you have a tough time with AirPods, or if you try musician earplugs and you can just never quite get an ear tip to fit right in your ears, this is what you should get. You should get custom in-ears because they absolutely fit your ears perfectly. That's the claim to fame. That's the whole point, is that it is a perfect mold of your ear. And I can attest to that when I put them in my ears, I wouldn't say it feels invisible. A lot of people will say, oh, you just forget they're there. It's like they're not even there. I wouldn't quite say that, but they're certainly not uncomfortable. It's almost like if you were sitting there with your hand on your own arm, you might forget that it's there, but it's not like it's invisible. You can still tell that there's pressure on your hand, but it's not like it's uncomfortable in any way. That's what I feel about these, that they're certainly not uncomfortable. That said, they are a hard plastic, so it's certainly not as soft as like a universal in-ear. It is hard plastic, but that said, if they've gotten your mold right, it should just feel like the faintest bit of pressure in your ears that is fairly easy to go unnoticed. Now, I'm someone that I've actually never really had much of a problem getting universal ears to fit right. I usually use the medium tips or the large tips. I've got AirPods Pros. Like I said, I had the Shure SE215s and the 535s, and I actually really liked how they fit. I never thought that they were uncomfortable. I would wear them for hours with the foam tips, and I never had a problem. And if you've had that experience like me, you may not actually find this to be the huge step up in comfort and in fit that you might be hoping for. Undoubtedly, you will get a better seal because this thing is going into your ear. So you will get a better seal, and if that's really what you want, if you want to just block out as much sound as possible, there's no better way to go than this. But if you're just wondering, like, is it going to be way more comfortable than my foam earplugs? If you already find them to be fairly comfortable, I don't think you're going to actually find these to be that much better. So that's something else to keep in mind, and maybe another plus one for universal fits. Now, I want to make a couple more comments about custom molds versus universal fits, because this is the sort sort of thing that I don't hear really anyone else talking about. It seems like anyone who's recommending in-ears is always recommending custom molds, bar none, and saying this is the only way to go. It's infinitely better than universal fits. And I'm here to push back on that a little bit and say that I think actually universal fits are a good option for a lot of people. Here's why. There are actually some benefits to having universal fits versus the custom molds that I didn't really think about before I got these. So one of them is I'm a teacher, and I find myself when I'm using universal fits, I find myself actually popping them in and out of my ears really frequently, either to talk to a student or if I just want to talk to bandmates. I pop them out and then I pop them back in quite a lot. You can't do that quite as easily with these. There's a little bit of a ritual and a process to go through putting these into your ears and taking them out. And it's not like it's really that hard or it takes that long, but there is that little extra bit of resistance where once you've got these in, you don't really want to take them out and vice versa. Whereas with the universal fits, I would just pop them out really quickly and then just shove them back into my ears, no problem. So if that's the kind of thing you do a lot, again, universals might actually be a better option for you. The other thing I hadn't considered is that there's something to be said for the resale value of getting universal fits. Not to say that you should be wheeling and dealing and trying to scalp in-ears, but I didn't really think about the fact that once you have these made for you, they are absolutely worthless to anyone else. You have no chance of selling these after the fact. Whereas let's say you get like the A6Us, you get the universal fits, you use them for a while and you decide, you know what, I actually do want to step up to the A12s. Well, you can reasonably just change the tips and then resell them, get some of your money back, and then get the more expensive ones. Whereas if I wanted to sell these, I probably couldn't pay anyone to take them off my hands. Other unique situations you might be in is if you have other members of your band that you might want to be able to share in-ears with. I know, sounds like it's gross, but maybe you're just changing the tips out. You've got your own set of tips and you swap in-ears, or maybe you have a large crew. Maybe you've got roadies or people that you want to be able to give in-ears in your crew and all have the same ears, and you can just switch the tips out. It makes it much more convenient than everyone having their own custom molds. Another thing to consider, it is possible that your ears change over time and that suddenly your ears that perfectly fit before don't fit so perfectly anymore. Whereas the universals, you can just change the ear tip. So all of that said, I think there's actually a strong case to be made for universal in-ears, and we can kind of break this question down. Is it worth it to get in-ears into two tiers? First of all, do you actually want to get in-ears in the first place? And then if you do, should you get custom molds or should you get universal fits? So let me lay out some use cases that I hope will cover pretty much anyone who's watching this video. And then I want to make a personalized recommendation on whether it makes sense for you to get, first of all, in-ears to begin with. Do you need them? And then second of all, do you want custom molds? Now, if you're someone who's mostly just practicing at home, you're a drummer or another musician, and you're thinking that maybe in-ears will just make the experience a little more fun, I would say don't go for custom molds, and here's why. Because they are so isolating, you are going to need some sort of monitoring setup to actually be able to hear your drums properly. Now, the exception to this is, like I said, if you're using the M10 modules from 64, I think those actually work really well, just piping music in and then being able to hear your drums. I think those sound great. But other than that, it's going to be isolating enough that you're going to want some sort of microphone system or something to actually be able to hear your drums. And they're not necessarily going to sound much better depending on how you're mixing it or if you're mixing it at all. Now, with that said, if you're someone that has a recording setup like this that's set up most of the time and you can actually monitor your setup really nicely, these work really, really well. But I think I would still recommend the universals in this case for all the reasons mentioned before. Okay, so maybe you're performing regularly or semi-regularly and you are thinking about switching from wedges to in-ears and you're wondering how difficult that transition might be, or you're wondering if that's going to be a pain in the butt from a mix perspective, or maybe the rest of your band uses in-ears or doesn't use in-ears. If you are not sure how you're going to like it, my recommendation would be to get some relatively inexpensive universal fit in-ears first, which is really not as hard as it sounds. You basically just need a small mixer and you're good to go. And if you want a better explanation on how to do that, I'm happy to make a video on that, but this one's gonna be long enough already. So in any case, I will just maybe put your mind at ease to say that to try an in-ear setup live, it's really not that hard at all, especially for a drummer where you're not moving around. You don't need a wireless pack, you don't need anything like that. You just need a small mixer that you can have next to you. So I would say try that with some less expensive in-ears first. And if you like it, then maybe go to some more expensive ones or consider custom molds. If you are performing and you're already using in-ears, maybe you're using some universal fits and you're really wondering, should I just make the jump to custom molds? My recommendation would be that if you're constantly having fit issues or if they ever fall fall out of your ears, yes, this is probably the solution that you're looking for. But if you kind of like your situation already and the fit is fine, they don't fall out of your ears, and you think they sound good, you're just wondering if they might sound better, I would say either stick with what you've got or maybe consider just getting some nicer universal fits. Okay, so now let's say you record frequently and you're wondering, will this be good for recording? This is a use case that I can say for sure in-ears are a good thing to have, for me at least, and custom molds are also great too, because you're not gonna be taking them in and out that frequently, and the custom molds are gonna give you that extra seal where you can really hear what's coming through the microphones, which is exactly what you want in a recording situation. You're also going to be able to hear whatever track you're recording to that much more clearly, so I can wholeheartedly recommend in-ears if you are looking to record with them frequently. Okay, so here's where it gets a little bit tricky. Let's say you just want these because you just want to listen to music and you want it to sound really good. Now, as I've said several times, my first impression with these ears was very positive, but I had a very positive experience with the universal fits and with the custom molds. So I would say if you're just looking to listen to music in a way that's better than your current setup, I would say go with the universal fits unless you're the kind of person that listens to music as a dedicated experience. If you want to just sit down, put these in, have them in for an extended period of time and just listen to music, this is a great experience for that. But if you're the type of person that listens to music sporadically, or if you want to just be able to pop the ears in and then pull them out, this is not as much of a plug and play experience. It's sort of like putting vinyl on where you kind of have to be committed. So if you really want to have that experience of listening to music, custom molds are probably a good way to go. But if you frequently pop ears in and take them out, these are not nearly as convenient as something like AirPods. So I have AirPods Pro and I still use them frequently just because they are incredibly convenient to just pull out and then put back in if you just need to listen to something for a couple of minutes, or if you're going into the grocery store, or in a situation where you're not going to bust out your expensive custom molded in-ears and shop for bananas. Couple of other use cases. If you plan on exercising with these, I would be hesitant to make a full recommendation. They definitely fit in your ears well, but you are going to be isolated from the outside world. So I don't think that I would use them for exercising, also because they have a cable and it's a relatively short cable at that. So you're gonna need probably some sort of extension, whereas Bluetooth headphones, for me at least, when it comes to exercising, is so much more freeing and a much more enjoyable experience for that reason. Now let's say you travel and you want to use these on long plane rides. I think these are actually a good option for that because they have a lot of isolation, though no active noise cancellation, but they are very comfortable and you should be able to wear them for hours on end and get really good sound and really good isolation. So let me just recap and reiterate a couple of key points from this entire experience and make some direct recommendations. First of all, if you have never used in-ears before and you're just wondering if they're right for you, I would highly recommend getting some less expensive universals first and deciding if that form factor is the kind of thing that fits your lifestyle or your work style or whatever it might be, your particular situation, and then reevaluate from there. Now, if you have already decided that you want to get some nicer in-ears, I can make two recommendations. First, I can recommend 64s solely for sound quality, not for any other reason than I just think that they sound really good. And specifically, I would recommend the A6s, either the universals or the customs. I would also recommend, if you don't have fit issues typically with headphones, go for the universals. I think there are actually some benefits to those. And if I was to do it all over again, I think I would probably get the universal versions of the A6s. I don't regret having these at all, and I'm really enjoying using them. But again, there are actually some benefits to the universals. The final recommendation I can make, and this may seem like an obvious one, but if you're interested in getting in-ears and you do tend to have fit issues, if you have weird ears, you should get custom molds. Custom molds, I can all but guarantee, will solve that problem. Now, of course, it's possible to have an issue with your fit, but all companies out there, I'm sure, are going to work with you until they get the fit exactly right. So that was a lot of information, and I hope that I covered any possible questions you might have had, and I'm really trying to cover questions that I might have had before going through this process. But that said, I still have these, so go ahead and ask me any questions you might have in the comments, and I'm happy to answer them either in the comments or just make follow-up videos for you. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.